Under the dimming sky of the western frontier, the Apache village of Red Bluff lay wrapped in the slow hum of evening. Smoke rose gently from the round roofs of the lodges, curling upward like prayers into the violet dusk. The voices of children faded into the rhythm of night, their laughter giving way to the distant call of coyotes. Chief Nantan stood before the fire in front of his home, the light licking across his withered face, eyes reflecting the same calm strength that had guided his people through storms of war and uneasy peace. Beside him, his wife Ayana moved with the quiet grace of wind brushing over water, her long dark hair braided and her eyes deep as the night sky. Around her neck shimmered the silver and turquoise necklace that Nantan had made in his youth. Every stone had been carved by his own hands, taken from the sacred ridge beyond the desert. It was more than adornment, it was their vow, a symbol of a bond unbroken through years of hunger, drought, and bloodshed. When she wore it, the tribe said the moon shone softer, as if the desert itself bowed to their love. Nantan turned toward her now, his voice low and warm. "The peace holds another season," he said. "The traders from Red Bluff brought flour and seed. No blood this year." Ayana smiled gently, pressing her hand to his. "Peace is like water in the desert," she murmured. "It must be tended every day, or it disappears." They stood together, silent for a time, watching sparks drift into the sky. Yet even in that calm, there was unease beneath the quiet, the kind that lives in every truce born of necessity, not trust. The settlers kept their distance, but their greed for land grew each year. The Apache, weary of war, watched and waited, their arrows quiet but never forgotten. That night, Nantan's thoughts drifted toward their daughter, Taya, his fierce, bright star. She had gone north to live among their allies, the Mescalero, to learn the ways of leadership and healing. Letters had come by riders, stories of her courage, her kindness, the way even elders paused to listen when she spoke. Ayana missed her terribly, though she never said so aloud. Sometimes at night, when the wind blew through the cottonwoods, she thought she could hear her daughter's laughter echoing faintly among the branches. As the moon climbed higher, Ayana prepared to travel to a nearby camp the next morning to deliver herbs and to pray for the harvest with the women there. Nantan watched her pack the small bundle, his eyes soft with affection. "Take 2 riders with you," he said. "The desert is still wild." "I will be safe," she answered. "Even the wind knows my path." She left at dawn. The first light poured across the sand, painting the world in gold. The necklace at her throat caught the sun and scattered it in tiny fragments across her skin. As she rode, the desert seemed alive. The smell of sage, the whisper of dust, the distant murmur of a hawk's cry overhead. But far from her path, in the town of Red Bluff, a man named Luke Harlow sat slumped over a table inside the Silver Spur Saloon. Once he had been a ranch hand with a good name, quick with a laugh and honest in a fight. But the West had a way of stripping a man down to what he truly was, and Luke had lost that fight long ago. A week of bad luck and worse whiskey had taken his horse, his gun, and his pride. That night, the poker table had taken the rest. He had thought the cards were turning. He had thought maybe God still remembered his name. But when the dealer's smirk cut across the lamplight and the last coin slid away from him, he saw the truth in the man's eyes. It was rigged. The laughter that followed burned hotter than whiskey ever could. Luke had staggered out into the night, a bottle in one hand, rage in the other. The desert stretched before him, endless and silent. He cursed the town, the cards, the world itself. "A man breaks his back his whole life," he muttered, stumbling through the sand. "And still, the devil wins." The stars above were merciless. His boots sank deep into the dust, his throat raw from the drink. Somewhere between anger and madness, he swore he'd take something back, something that proved the world hadn't taken everything yet. By late afternoon, the sun began to fade. He saw movement along the trail ahead, a lone rider, cloaked in the colors of the setting sun, Ayana. She rode calmly, unaware of him, humming softly to herself. The necklace at her throat shimmered, as if the desert light itself had chosen her. Luke's breath caught. The shimmer looked like money. He didn't see the woman. Not really. Just the glint of silver, the salvation of his pride. He stepped into the path, his shadow stretching long across the sand. "Ma'am," he called, voice thick, "you're far from town. Dangerous place for fine jewelry." Ayanna slowed her horse, the calm of her spirit unbroken. "This is my home," she said gently. "The danger belongs to those who bring it." Her words were kind, but they cut through his haze. Something in her poise, that unshaken dignity, enraged him more than the laughter at the poker table. The bottle slipped from his hand and shattered. His eyes burned red with humiliation. "Don't talk down to me," he snarled, stepping forward. "You think you're better than me?" Ayanna saw then the wildness in his gaze. She urged her horse back, but he lunged, grabbing at the necklace. The chain snapped. Turquoise scattered into the dust. She struck him across the face, but he pushed her hard. Too hard. She fell, the sand exploding around her. For a moment, the world went silent. The wind stilled. Even Luke froze. He hadn't meant to hurt her. His hands shook as he stared at the woman lying in the sand, her breath shallow. The broken necklace glittered in his palm, her blood on one of the stones. Panic clawed through the fog of whiskey. He stuffed the necklace into his coat, turned, and ran. The sound of his boots faded into the wind. When Ayanna opened her eyes again, the world was dim. The sky was deep blue, the moon rising full and cold. Pain pulsed through her shoulder, but it was not the wound that hurt most. It was the emptiness at her throat. The necklace was gone. She tried to stand, but her legs trembled. She sank back into the sand, her breath shallow. The desert around her was vast, endless, indifferent. Yet even as darkness closed in, she whispered softly into the wind. "Taya." The name floated away like smoke. Somewhere far off, coyotes cried, a haunting echo through the canyons. She closed her eyes, clutching her shawl, the moonlight washing over her face. The world dimmed to silver and silence. By midnight, the riders from the nearby camp found her collapsed beside her horse. They lifted her gently, wrapping her in blankets, and carried her home beneath the ghostly light. The necklace, the bond of love and peace, was gone, and in its absence, something darker began to stir across the plains. Back in Red Bluff, Luke stumbled into an abandoned shack at the edge of town. The adrenaline had long since faded, leaving only sickness and dread. He pulled the necklace from his pocket, holding it up to the lantern light. Its beauty cut through him like a blade. The turquoise gleamed, alive even in shadow. He stared at it until his vision blurred. "What did I do?" he whispered. The weight of it felt heavier than iron. He tried to throw it away, but his fingers wouldn't open. He set it on the table instead and poured another drink, trying to drown the echo of her voice, the look in her eyes. Outside, the wind howled against the walls like a mourning spirit. Meanwhile, miles away, Chief Nantan woke before dawn with a chill crawling through his chest. Ayanna's horse stood outside the lodge, riderless, dust clinging to its flanks. The chief's heart stopped. He ran out barefoot into the sand, calling her name. When the riders arrived with her limp form draped across a blanket, a sound tore from his throat. Something raw, something ancient, something no man should ever have to make. The tribe gathered in silence. Ayanna was alive, but barely. Her breath was shallow, her shoulder bruised and bloodied. Nantan knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. Her eyes fluttered open, searching for him. "The necklace," she whispered. "It's gone." Nantan bowed his head, tears streaking the dust on his cheeks. He could feel it in his bones. The piece they had bled to build was breaking apart, thread by thread. When the first light of morning touched the sky, he sent word across the plains to summon his daughter. Far beyond the horizon, in the camp of the Mescalero, Taya woke to the sound of hooves approaching fast. A messenger dismounted before her tent, his voice shaking as he spoke her name. Her mother had been attacked. Her father called for her. She didn't ask for details. She didn't pack much. By the time the sun broke fully over the hills, she was already riding south, wind tearing through her braids, her heart pounding with dread and fury. The desert stretched before her, endless, waiting, watching. And as she rode, the moon's faint reflection glimmered on the horizon like silver tears, marking the place where blood and sand had met. The peace of Red Bluff had ended. The wind carried whispers of thunder, and far ahead, in the shadows of the canyons, a broken necklace waited to decide the fate of every heart it had once bound. The morning broke red across the desert sky, like a wound opening over the horizon. Smoke rose from the Apache village as fires were stoked to life. But there was no laughter, no songs, no sound of children chasing the dawn. The air was heavy, the kind of silence that follows a broken heart. Ayanna lay inside the chief's lodge, her breath faint but steady. The healers moved softly around her, their hands gentle, their faces carved with worry. Nantan sat beside her bed, his large hands trembling as they held a bowl of water. His wife's face looked pale against the woven blankets, her hair tangled, streaked with dust. Every few moments she stirred and whispered Taya's name. He would dip the cloth and cool her brow, again and again, whispering words of comfort that she could no longer hear. Outside, the tribe waited for his command. Every warrior knew the name of the man who had done this did not matter, only that someone had dared. The line of peace between Apache and settler had been crossed, and the earth itself seemed to hold its breath for what would follow. When the sun climbed higher, the sound of hooves echoed from the canyon. A rider appeared, fierce and fast, her dark hair whipping behind her like a storm. Taya. She dismounted before the lodge, dust swirling around her boots. Her heart beat so violently, it drowned out the world. The people parted as she passed, their eyes following her like the shadow of a hawk. They whispered her name with both fear and hope. Taya, daughter of Nantan, the fire that never dies. She pushed open the flap and stepped inside. Her mother lay before her, still, quiet, her skin the color of snow. Taya's breath caught. She fell to her knees beside the bed, reaching for her mother's hand. It felt warm, but weak, as if life itself was slipping through her fingers. "Mother," her voice broke, "I came as fast as I could." Ayanna's eyelids fluttered. She smiled faintly, her lips barely moving. "My daughter," she whispered, her words trembling like wind. "You came home." Taya bent forward and pressed her forehead to her mother's hand. "Who did this?" she asked. Ayanna did not answer. Her gaze drifted toward the empty space where the necklace had once lain. Her hand moved weakly toward her throat. Tears welled in Taya's eyes as she understood. The sacred symbol of their family's love, gone, torn away. She turned to her father. "Who took it?" Nantan's jaw tightened. He looked older than she had ever seen him. "A white man," he said quietly. "A thief. He left her in the sand." Taya's entire body went still. Her eyes hardened, like steel beneath sunlight. "Then I will bring it back," she said, her voice low and steady. Nantan's gaze flickered toward her. "You are my daughter," he said, "but you are not a weapon." Taya stood. Her shadow stretched across the floor. "I am what you and Mother made me," she said. "I am your fire." Outside, the wind picked up, stirring the dust around the lodges. It carried whispers of the words she spoke next, words that would be remembered long after the desert forgot their faces. "I will ride for the necklace," she said. "And I will bring it back, even if I must cross the line between the living and the dead." The council gathered before midday. Warriors sat in a wide circle, their faces solemn, their spears lined like the ribs of a great beast. Taya stood in the center, her head held high. She spoke of honor, of the wound done to their people, of her mother's suffering. Every word burned like fire in their hearts. They were tired of watching the settlers spit on their peace. Taya's voice carried through the wind, fierce and clear. "This is not only about a necklace. It is about who we are. If they take from us what is sacred, then they take our soul." A roar rose from the men. Spears struck the ground in unison. The sound rolled through the valley like thunder. By evening, the decision was made. 1,000 warriors would ride. Taya went to her mother once more before she left. Ayana's eyes were open now, weak but aware. She reached for her daughter's face and traced her fingers along her cheek. "My child," she said softly, "do not let anger turn your heart to stone." Taya leaned closer. "I ride for you, mother, for father, for our people." Ayana smiled faintly. "Then ride with mercy, not vengeance. The necklace carries love, not hate." Her words fell into the air like feathers. Taya listened, but deep in her chest, the fire of fury still burned. She kissed her mother's forehead, turned, and walked into the dusk. The camp came alive with movement. Horses stamped and snorted. Warriors painted their faces in crimson and black. The sound of drums rose slowly, not for war, but for justice. The rhythm echoed through the cliffs, a heartbeat of an ancient people remembering their strength. Taya mounted her white stallion, Spirit Wind, the horse her father had given her years ago. The sky was painted red by the dying sun. Her father stood watching her, his figure outlined by the firelight. He said nothing at first, only placed a hand on her arm. "Bring back what was taken," he said finally. "But remember, a chief's daughter does not lose herself to blood." Taya nodded. "I will not lose myself. I will find the truth." And with a sharp cry, she urged her horse forward. 1,000 warriors followed her, their horses kicking up a storm of dust. The sound of their hooves filled the earth. Steady, relentless, alive. The march lasted through the night. The stars above watched in silence, their cold light glinting off the tips of arrows and blades. When dawn came, the desert stretched endless before them, a sea of gold and bone. Taya rode at the front, her braids whipping behind her, her face unreadable. Her thoughts were a storm of images, her mother's hand in hers, the glint of silver, the stranger's shadow. By midday, they reached the ridge overlooking Red Bluff. Smoke rose from the chimneys of the town below. Settlers walked the streets, unaware of what thunder loomed beyond the horizon. Taya raised her hand. The riders halted. The sound of wind filled the silence. She studied the town, its church spire, its saloon, its narrow main road. Somewhere in there was the man who had touched her mother, who had stolen their sacred bond. Her heart ached, but she forced the pain down. This was not a moment for sorrow. It was a reckoning. She signaled 2 scouts to move ahead, silent and swift as ghosts. They disappeared among the rocks. For hours, she waited beneath the scorching sun, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The desert around her shimmered with heat. The longer she waited, the heavier her chest felt. Then the scouts returned. One of them dismounted and handed her something. A piece of broken silver, dull with dirt. One of the necklace's stones. They had found it near the saloon's back trail. Taya's eyes narrowed. "He's there," she said. The warriors murmured among themselves, hands tightening around their weapons. The Apache had not entered a settler town in force for many years. But tonight, the silence of peace would be broken. As the sun began to set, the light turned copper, painting the desert in blood. Taya rode down first, cloak trailing behind her like a storm cloud. Her warriors followed, shadows stretching long behind them. The town grew quiet as they approached. A few men stepped out from doorways, their faces pale. The sound of spurs and hooves filled the main street. Taya's horse stopped before the saloon. The wind blew through the swinging doors, carrying the smell of whiskey and sweat. She dismounted, her boots hitting the dust with a soft thud. Inside, laughter died the moment she appeared. Every head turned. The piano stopped mid-song. She stood there, tall and steady, her gaze sweeping across the room until it stopped on him. Luke Harlow. He was sitting alone at the far table, a bottle half empty beside him, his eyes hollow. For a moment, neither moved. The world narrowed to the space between them. Taya walked forward. Each step echoed against the wooden floor. Luke straightened, guilt flooding his face as recognition dawned. "You," she said quietly. He swallowed hard. "I didn't mean—" Silence. She cut him off, her voice sharp as flint. "You touched my mother." The room held its breath. Luke's hands trembled. "I was drunk. I was desperate." "You were a coward," she said. He looked down. "I know." Taya's eyes flashed. "You took her necklace. Give it to me." He hesitated, then reached into his coat. The silver and turquoise chain glimmered faintly in the lamplight. He set it on the table with shaking hands. Taya stared at it. The sight made her chest tighten. That symbol of love now tainted by greed and violence. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she picked it up, wrapped it in her hand, and turned toward him. "You will come with me," she said. Luke blinked, confused. "What?" "You will answer before my father. You will see what you have done." Outside, the Apache waited in silence as she emerged with the thief in tow. Luke stumbled into the street, his wrists bound. The people of Red Bluff whispered in fear as the warriors surrounded him. Taya mounted her horse again, the necklace clutched in her hand. The sky had gone dark now, heavy with stars. As they rode out of the town, Luke looked back once, at the lights of the saloon fading behind him. He knew he would not see it again. Taya did not look back. Her eyes were fixed on the horizon, on the distant glow of her village, on the promise she had made beside her mother's bed. The night wind whipped through her hair. In its howl, she could almost hear her mother's voice, ride with mercy, not vengeance. But her heart was still a storm. And the desert was listening. The desert night was vast and endless. Stars hung heavy above, glittering like ancient eyes watching the slow procession that cut across the sand. The line of Apache riders moved silently through the darkness, their torches flickering in the wind. At their head rode Taya, her face half shadowed by moonlight, her posture still and unyielding. Behind her, bound at the wrists and slumped in exhaustion, rode Luke Harlow. The rope chafed his skin raw. His body ached from the ride, his throat burned from thirst. Every hoofbeat sounded like the echo of judgment. The warriors surrounding him said nothing, but he could feel their hatred in the air, as thick and suffocating as the dust that rose beneath their horses. He had no words left. The silence was punishment enough. Taya did not look back at him. Her gaze remained fixed on the trail ahead, where the faint glow of the campfires was beginning to shimmer on the horizon. She had not spoken since they left Red Bluff. Her thoughts were a whirlpool. Her mother's pale face, her father's quiet sorrow, the cold weight of the necklace in her hand. It pulsed like a heartbeat, a reminder of everything that had been taken. When the first blush of dawn spread across the land, they reached the edge of the Apache village. The drums had been silent for days, but as Taya rode in with the captive, a low murmur rippled through the crowd. Men and women gathered outside their lodges, children peeking from behind skirts. The sight of the white stranger bound in their midst stirred whispers like wind in the grass. Nantan emerged from his home, tall and grave, his expression carved from stone. Ayana was not far behind, weak but standing with the help of two women. When she saw Luke, her breath caught. Her eyes filled not with anger but with something softer, sorrow. Taya dismounted and bowed before her father. She held out the necklace in both hands. "It is returned," she said quietly. Nantan took it from her and turned it over in the light. The silver was tarnished. One of the turquoise stones cracked. He looked from the necklace to the man who had stolen it. "And this is the one who brought it to shame?" "Yes," Taya answered. "He came drunk, and he struck her down." Luke lifted his head, his voice hoarse. "I didn't mean to harm her." The words fell like stones into the dust. The crowd murmured in anger. Nantan's gaze was sharp, but his voice remained calm. "A man's intent does not heal a wound," he said. "It only names the shape of his guilt." He motioned for two warriors to untie Luke's wrists but keep him surrounded. "He will stand trial at sundown," Nantan said. "Let the spirits see his heart." Luke lowered his head again. He was too weak to fight, too ashamed to speak. The warriors dragged him away to a small tent near the edge of the camp, where he was given water but no words. Taya watched him go, her heart still hard, but something in her mother's eyes unsettled her. That gentleness, that mercy, it did not belong in this moment. And yet, it lived there still. She turned to Ayana, who leaned wearily against one of the women. "Mother, Taya said softly. You should rest. Ayana's gaze lingered on Luke as he disappeared into the tent. Rest will come when the spirit is clean, she murmured. His and ours. Taya frowned. You pity him? Ayana looked at her daughter, her eyes deep as a well. No, I pity what the world made him. Taya had no answer. She simply bowed her head and helped her mother back inside. By late afternoon, the village buzzed with tension. Smoke curled from cooking fires, drums beat softly in the distance, and men sharpened their blades. Not for battle, but from habit, the ritual of readiness. Inside the tent, Luke sat alone. His hands trembled as he held the cup of water they had given him. He thought of running, but there was nowhere to go. He thought of fighting, but he no longer had the will. The faces outside, the eyes that watched him with hate, were not wrong. He had done this. He had taken from a woman who had done him no harm. He remembered her eyes that night, calm, steady, unafraid, even as he struck her. That memory had haunted him every hour since. He pressed his palms to his face and groaned. The necklace had felt like salvation once. Now it felt like a curse that had burned itself into his soul. When the sun began to sink, a warrior entered the tent. The chief calls, he said. Luke stood, his legs stiff, and followed him out. The entire village had gathered around the great fire at the center. The flames leapt high, painting every face in gold and shadow. Nantan sat at the front beside Ayana, who watched with tired eyes. Taya stood to her mother's right, her expression unreadable. Luke was pushed to the center of the circle. The murmurs fell silent. Only the crackle of fire broke the stillness. Nantan rose slowly. His voice carried deep and steady across the crowd. This man crossed our land. He struck my wife. He stole what was sacred. What does a man deserve when he steals more than gold? When he steals peace? The warriors shouted their answers. Death. Blood for blood. Taya said nothing. Her gaze stayed fixed on Luke, watching every twitch of his jaw, every flicker of guilt. Nantan raised his hand for silence. You have heard your people, he said. But justice is not hunger. It must feed the spirit, not the fire. He turned to Luke. You will speak. Tell us what the spirits must hear. Luke swallowed hard. His throat felt tight, his mouth dry. He looked around the circle, faces hard as stone, eyes blazing in the torchlight. I was drunk, he began. That's no excuse, but it's the truth. I lost everything. My horse, my money, my name. I saw her on the road and I thought if I took something beautiful, maybe the world would stop laughing at me. His voice cracked, but she looked at me like I was already dead. The murmurs rose again, but Ayana's soft voice cut through them. And now? She asked. Luke looked up, meeting her gaze. Now I wish I had died that night, he said. Because I can't live knowing what I did. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the weight of truth. Nantan studied him for a long time. Then he turned to Ayana. You are the one he wounded, he said. The spirits listened to the voice of the harmed. What do you say should be done? The crowd held its breath. Ayana stepped forward, slow and trembling, but steady in her words. If we kill him, his blood will feed the sand. Nothing more. But if we let him live, his soul will feed the lesson. Let him stay. Let him work until the necklace's worth is repaid. Not in silver, but in heart. The crowd stirred, shocked murmurs rippling through the ranks. Taya's eyes widened. Mother, Ayana turned to her daughter. Would you have my heart turn cold? She asked softly. Forgiveness is harder than vengeance. That is why it must be done. Nantan closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was pride in them and sorrow. So it will be, he said. He will live among us, watched, tested, judged by his deeds. If he runs, he dies. If he harms again, he dies. But if he works, he may find peace. Taya looked away. Her jaw tightened. This was not the justice she had ridden for. The circle broke apart slowly, some muttering, others silent. Luke was led away again, But this time his bonds were cut. The warriors gave him tools, not weapons. He was told to work where the chief ordered, tending the horses, carrying water, mending fences. Days passed. The sun rose and fell over the red desert hills, each dawn softer than the last. Luke worked without complaint. He rose before light and labored until his hands bled. Some spat near him when he passed. Others ignored him entirely. But he did not answer with anger. He simply worked. Sometimes, from a distance, Taya watched him. She saw the way he bowed his head, the way he spoke to no one, the way he never looked toward the mountains where escape waited. There was something strange in that silence. Not pride, not cowardice, but something humbler. One evening, as the sun was setting, she found him near the corral, repairing a broken gate. He didn't notice her at first. His hands moved carefully over the wood, his shoulders glistening with sweat. "You work hard for a man waiting to die," she said. He looked up, startled, then gave a small, sad smile. "Maybe that's the point," he said. "If I work long enough, maybe I'll deserve it." Taya folded her arms. "My mother spared you. I would not have." "I know," he said quietly, "and I wouldn't blame you." For a moment, she studied him. His eyes were tired, but honest. She hated that honesty. It disarmed her more than arrogance ever could. "You're not what I expected," she said. Luke laughed once, softly. "I used to be better. Then I wasn't." The silence stretched between them, heavy but not cruel. The sky deepened to violet, the first stars appearing overhead. Taya turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "For what it's worth," he said, "I never stopped thinking about that night, not a day since." She hesitated, then walked away without answering. But her steps were slower than before. Over the following weeks, something began to shift. Luke continued to work, building, hauling, mending, and though the tribe's suspicion lingered, it began to soften. Children watched him curiously. A few even smiled. When one of the horses escaped into the canyon, Luke went after it without hesitation, returning hours later with the animal trembling but safe. Word spread. The thief, who once brought shame, now carried burdens for others. Taya watched all this in silence. She told herself it didn't matter, that one man's labor could not erase a scar. Yet when she saw him laughing with a child, or offering his share of water to an elder, something inside her wavered. One evening she found him again, this time sitting by the fire, alone, staring at the flames. She approached quietly. "You could run," she said. "No one would stop you beyond the canyon." He didn't look at her. "Maybe once I would have, but running only makes the ghosts faster." She sat beside him, surprising even herself. The fire crackled between them. "Why are you here?" she asked finally. "Why not fight, or curse, or hate us for keeping you?" Luke's voice was soft. "Because you gave me what I didn't deserve. Another chance to be human." Taya turned to study him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. She wanted to hate him still. She tried. But hatred could not grow in the soil where remorse had already taken root. They sat in silence until the stars thickened overhead. When she stood to leave, Luke said quietly, "Tell your mother I thank her." Taya nodded once. "You tell her yourself." As she walked away, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of sage and rain. For the first time in many moons, the desert smelled like forgiveness. The summer sun rolled high over the desert, pouring gold across the red stone mesas and the river that wound like a silver snake through Apache land. Days had grown longer, quieter. The rage that once trembled through the camp had begun to cool, though it still lingered like a storm far off in the distance. The man who had arrived in chains now moved among them freely, watched, but no longer hunted. Luke Harlow worked from dawn until the stars rose. He carried water, split wood, helped mend roofs battered by wind. His hands were calloused, his back burned by the sun, but he never complained. He spoke little, but his silence was no longer that of guilt. It had become a kind of prayer. Every nail driven, every bucket lifted, every grain of sweat was his offering to the people he had wronged. The children no longer ran from him. They followed him instead, curious, trailing after his shadow like little ghosts. Sometimes they asked questions in Apache, words he did not yet understand, and he would answer with gestures, laughter, or the few phrases Taya had taught him. When he handed out pieces of dried fruit or showed them how to make a lasso from twisted grass, their giggles filled the air, and for a few brief moments, he forgot he was a man who had once stolen life from someone else. Taya watched all this from afar. She wanted to distrust him still, to remind herself of what he had done, but every day she saw him kneel beside the old and carry their burdens without being asked. Every day she saw the way he looked at her mother, never directly, always with reverence, like a man humbled by something he could never repay. Ayana's health had returned little by little. She spent her mornings sitting beneath the cottonwoods, her hands weaving strands of grass or beads into small trinkets. When Luke passed by, she would sometimes call him over to help. He obeyed quietly, his large fingers clumsy around the delicate work. Ayana would smile and correct his mistakes with patience. One afternoon, as the light shimmered over the river, she said softly, "You have strong hands, Luke, but strength means little without purpose. Do you know yours yet?" He looked down at his work, his voice low. "Maybe just to keep building until the people stop remembering who I was." Ayana nodded. "They will never forget, but perhaps one day they will forgive. There is difference." He swallowed hard. "And you? Have you forgiven me?" Her eyes met his, calm and steady. "I forgave you the moment I saw your shame. But forgiveness does not erase what was done. It only gives life to what can be done next." That night, Luke could not sleep. He sat by the fire, watching the flames twist and whisper. The stars above were endless. He thought of Ayana's words, "Forgiveness gives life to what comes next," and wondered what life was left for him to live. He did not notice when Taya approached. Her footsteps were light as the wind. She stood beside him for a while, silent, her hair catching the glow of the fire. "You shouldn't be here alone," she said at last. He turned, startled, then smiled faintly. "I'm not alone. The ghosts keep me company." Her eyes narrowed. "You talk like a man who enjoys his guilt." "Maybe I do," he said. "It's the only thing that's still mine." Taya folded her arms, studying him. "My mother believes you can change. My father doubts it. I haven't decided." Luke poked the fire with a stick. "Then I'll just have to keep working until you do." There was a pause, a quiet that held something unspoken. Taya's voice softened. "You remind me of a story my mother told me once, about a coyote who killed a deer and was cursed to carry its spirit. Every time he hunted again, he saw her eyes in the dark, so one day he stopped hunting. He became the guardian of her herd." Luke glanced at her. "And did the spirits forgive him?" "No," Taya said, "but they let him stay." They shared a look that lasted longer than either meant it to. Then she turned and walked away into the night, her figure fading into the moonlight. Luke watched her go, something tight and painful rising in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Weeks passed. The rhythm of work and rest became life. Luke learned to ride again, to fish the river, to understand the words the people used. He learned their customs, to greet with an open hand, to bow before the elders, to treat fire as a living thing. And as he learned, the tribe slowly began to see him not as the drunk who had brought them sorrow, but as a man trying to rebuild himself from ashes. One morning, he joined a group sent to gather wood in the canyon. Taya rode with them, her bow slung across her back, her posture proud. The heat shimmered off the rocks, and their horses moved slow beneath it. As they rode, a sudden noise cracked through the air. A rattlesnake's warning cry. One of the younger warriors' horses reared violently. The boy fell, his foot caught in the stirrup. The frightened animal bolted, dragging him through the sand. Without thinking, Luke spurred his horse forward. He raced after the runaway, shouting, pulling alongside it, and threw himself onto the reins. The two animals collided, the world spinning into chaos. Dust, sweat, hooves. He managed to stop the horse, cutting the boy loose just before the animal toppled. Luke hit the ground hard, the breath torn from his lungs. When the others caught up, Taya jumped from her horse and ran to him. He lay sprawled in the dust, blood on his arm, a grimace on his face. She knelt beside him, her voice sharp with concern. "You fool!" she hissed. "You could have been killed." He coughed, laughing weakly. "Seems I'm better at saving lives than taking them now." Her anger faltered, replaced by something she didn't want to name. She pressed her hand against his arm to stop the bleeding. Her touch was warm, grounding. Their eyes met again, and this time, neither looked away. That evening, word spread quickly. The man who had once stolen from the chief's wife had risked his life to save one of their own. When Nantan heard, he said nothing for a long time, then nodded once. Perhaps the spirits are not done with him yet. Days later, Luke stood at the edge of the village, his arm bandaged, watching the sun rise. Taya approached quietly, holding something wrapped in cloth. "My mother asked me to give this to you," she said. He opened it carefully. Inside lay a small pendant, a single turquoise stone tied to a strip of leather. "She said it fell from the necklace that night," Taya explained. "She wants you to keep it, to remind you that even broken things can still carry light." Luke stared at it, his throat tightening. "I don't deserve this." Taya's gaze softened. "No one ever does. That's why it matters." He tied the pendant around his wrist and nodded his thanks, unable to speak. From that day on, something changed between them. Their conversations grew longer. She taught him her language, the meanings behind the songs sung at dusk. He told her stories from the frontier, tales of lonely roads, lost brothers, and nights when the stars were the only friends he had left. She laughed sometimes, genuine and free. Other times she simply listened, her heart caught between pity and something deeper. When they rode out together to check the cattle or gather herbs, there were moments of silence that felt full instead of empty. She began to trust the quiet beside him. He began to feel for the first time that maybe redemption was not a word made of lies. But peace in the desert never lasted long. One night, as the camp slept, distant gunfire cracked across the canyon, sharp, unmistakable. The guard shouted alarms. Taya rushed from her lodge, bow in hand. From the hills came shadows, men on horseback, torches flaring in their hands. Not soldiers, outlaws, the same gang Luke had once ridden with. They came screaming through the night, firing into the camp, scattering livestock, stealing what they could grab. The air filled with smoke and fear. Luke woke to chaos. He saw the faces through the firelight and froze. Recognition struck him like a blow. They were his past, come riding out of hell to claim him back. "Taya!" he shouted, running toward her through the smoke. "Get your people back! They're after me!" She fired an arrow that dropped one of the riders cleanly, then turned on him, furious. "What do you mean they're after you? They think I've got gold!" "That I hid it here!" He grabbed her arm, eyes wild. "They'll kill everyone if I don't stop them?" Before she could answer, one of the outlaws appeared behind them, a revolver raised. Luke turned and slammed into him, the gunshot tearing through the night. The two men tumbled into the sand, fists flying. Luke drove his elbow into the man's throat and ripped the gun away. He fired once, then twice, the noise deafening. The raiders broke when the warriors rallied. Nantan's men poured from their lodges with bows and rifles, driving the outlaws back into the darkness. The last echo of gunfire faded into the canyon. The night grew still again. When it was over, Luke stood shaking, the revolver still smoking in his hand. Blood ran from a cut on his forehead, but he barely felt it. Taya approached slowly. Her eyes were unreadable. "You brought this trouble here," she said. He nodded, his voice breaking. "I know, but I'll spend my life paying it back, if you'll let me." She looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "You already have." Behind her, the first light of dawn began to rise, pale and trembling across the desert. Smoke drifted from the fires, but the village still stood. Ayana came forward, leaning on her husband's arm. She looked at Luke and smiled. "The spirits tested you," she said, "and you stood between life and death for us. That is what makes a man." Nantan placed a hand on Luke's shoulder. "You came here a thief," he said quietly. "Now you have fought as a brother." Luke lowered his head. overwhelmed. Taya stood beside him, her expression soft, her eyes bright with something unspoken. The spark of a feeling neither had asked for but could no longer deny. That evening, as the sky turned crimson, the people gathered again by the fire. Ayana brought forth the silver and turquoise necklace, now whole again. She held it in her hands, the stones gleaming in the fading light. She turned to her daughter. "This belonged to love once," she said. "Now it belongs to hope." She placed it around Taya's neck, then looked at Luke. "And to the man who reminded us that even the lost can find their way home." The drums began to beat softly. The wind carried the sound out across the desert. Luke looked at Taya, and for the first time she smiled without anger. Under the wide, forgiving sky, two souls who had met in violence stood together in peace. And in the glow of that fire, the necklace shimmered, no longer a token of pain, but of something far greater, love reborn from forgiveness. And the desert, once silent, seemed to breathe again. The desert awoke in silence. Morning light spilled across the ridges, bathing the earth in soft gold. Smoke from the fires of the night before drifted faintly upward, curling into the pale sky. The camp was quiet, exhausted but alive. The smell of dust and burned wood hung in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of sage. Luke stood at the edge of the river, his hands resting on his knees. His reflection wavered in the water. A man scarred, bruised but still standing. He splashed cold water onto his face and watched the ripples erase his image for a moment. He wondered if that was how redemption worked, not erasing what was done, but softening the shape of it. Behind him, the camp began to stir. Horses neighed softly, women gathered water, children ran between the lodges, laughing again as if the night's terror had been swallowed by dawn. The world had survived. And for the first time in his life, Luke felt that he might truly belong somewhere. He turned as he heard soft footsteps behind him. Taya approached, the silver and turquoise necklace glinting around her neck. The sunlight caught on its stones, scattering color across her skin. For a moment, Luke could not speak. "You're awake early," she said, her tone calm but her eyes bright. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted. "Too quiet." Taya stepped closer, her gaze following his to the river. "Quiet means peace," she said. "You're not used to that, are you?" He shook his head slowly. Peace always felt like something that belonged to other people. She studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "It belongs to those who choose it, even if it takes a lifetime." He turned toward her. "And what about forgiveness? Does that belong to those who ask for it, or those who give it?" Taya's expression softened. "Both," she said quietly. "But forgiveness isn't given all at once. It grows like the desert bloom after rain, slow, patient. But when it comes, it changes everything." The words hung between them, warm as the sun. Luke wanted to thank her, to say something that might match the weight of what she had given him, but all he could do was nod. His throat was too full. Later that morning, the tribe gathered to count the damage from the raid. A few cattle had been stolen, one lodge burned, but the people were safe. Still, there was unease among the warriors. The men who had attacked were not strangers. They were part of Luke's old life, men who would not let go easily. Chief Nantan stood before the fire, his face grave. "They will come again," he said. "Men like that do not stop when they fail. They will come for revenge, or greed, or both." Luke stepped forward. "Then I'll stop them before they do." The chief turned his gaze on him. "You fought bravely, but you are still one man." "Then let me ride ahead of them," Luke said firmly. "I know their ways. I know their leader, Jed Carter. He'll regroup near the canyon trail. If I can cut him off, the tribe will be safe." Taya shook her head sharply. "You won't go alone." He looked at her. "It's me they want, Taya. If I leave, they'll follow. They won't come back here." Her voice rose. "You don't get to decide that. You think dying will make things right? You think my mother's forgiveness was meant for you to throw away?" The camp fell silent. Even the fire seemed to still. Luke's chest tightened. He stepped closer, his voice rough but steady. "This isn't about dying. It's about ending what I started. Nantan watched them both for a long moment, then spoke quietly. He is right, but no man should face his past alone. Taya turned to him, defiant. Then, I will ride with him. Her father's eyes softened, the lines on his face deepening. You are your mother's daughter, he said, stubborn, even against love. That night, they prepared their horses. Ayana came to see them off. She pressed her hands to Taya's cheeks, her eyes glistening with tears that did not fall. You carry our hope, my child, she said softly. And you, she turned to Luke, carry our debt to the wind. Do not let it claim you. Luke bowed his head. I won't. They rode at dawn, two shadows against the rising sun. The desert stretched before them, vast, endless, beautiful. The wind tugged at their hair, the hooves of their horses thundering softly across the sand. For hours, neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Every breath, every heartbeat, was its own confession. By midday, they reached the canyon trail, a jagged scar of red rock cutting deep through the earth. Luke slowed his horse, scanning the horizon. He knew the place well. He had hidden there once, years ago, after a botched robbery. It was where Jed Carter liked to set traps. They dismounted and moved quietly among the stones. The air smelled of dust and gunpowder. Luke crouched behind a rock, motioning for Taya to stay low. There, he whispered. In the distance, a group of riders gathered around a fire. Carter's men. 6 of them. The leader sat tall on his horse, a scar running down his face like a lightning strike. Luke's jaw tightened. That's him. Taya watched his face. What will you do? Talk first, Luke said. If that fails, we fight. He stepped out from behind the rocks, his voice ringing across the canyon. Carter! The men turned, startled. Carter's grin spread slow and mean. Well, I'll be damned, he drawled. Luke Harlow, I heard you'd gone native. Luke stopped a few paces away. It's over, Jed. You come near that camp again, you won't walk away. Carter laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. You think you can stop me, boy? You and your painted friends? He spat into the sand. You always were soft. Luke took another step forward. I was lost, not soft. There's a difference. Carter's smile faded. You know what I think? I think that Chief and his pretty daughter filled your head with stories. You forgot who you are. I remembered who I was supposed to be, Luke said quietly. Carter's eyes narrowed. Then you ain't one of us anymore. The world seemed to still. The wind stopped. The sun burned down. Carter drew his gun. Luke's hand moved at the same moment. 2 shots cracked through the air, echoing across the canyon. Dust exploded around them. Carter fell from his horse, the bullet in his chest blooming red. The others scrambled for cover. Taya moved fast, loosing arrows from her bow with deadly precision. One man dropped, then another. Luke fired again, ducking behind the rocks. The sound of gunfire bounced between the canyon walls until it felt like the sky itself was splitting open. When it ended, silence fell heavy and absolute. Smoke hung in the air. Luke's hands shook as he lowered his gun. Carter lay still in the dust, eyes staring at nothing. Taya approached slowly. Her face was unreadable. It's done, she said. Luke nodded, but his voice was quiet. It never really is. They buried the bodies beneath the rocks and set fire to what was left of the camp. The smoke rose into the sky, carrying the ghosts of the past with it. As they watched, Luke felt something inside him break free, a weight that had lived in his chest for too many years. When they turned to leave, Taya reached out and took his hand. The gesture was simple, but it stopped his breath. Her fingers were warm, strong. Let's go home, she said. The ride back was long and silent. The sun dipped low, painting the world in red and gold. When they reached the edge of the village, the people were waiting. Nantan stood at the front, Ayana beside him. Relief washed over their faces. Luke dismounted first, his body trembling from exhaustion. He knelt before the chief. It's done, he said simply. Nantan nodded. The past dies hard, he said, but it dies. Ayana stepped forward and placed her hand on Luke's shoulder. "You have repaid your debt," she said softly. "Now live, Luke, not for penance, for peace." He looked up at her, tears stinging his eyes. "I don't know if I know how." She smiled gently. "Then learn. With her." He turned to Taya. She stood in the fading light, her hair catching the glow of the sunset, the necklace gleaming at her throat. When their eyes met, the world seemed to fall away. The camp, the mountains, the endless desert. She took a slow step toward him. "You could stay," she said, "if you want." Luke's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you want me to?" Her answer came in the softest way. Not in words, but in the way her hand found his, the way she leaned close enough that he could feel her breath. The wind rose around them, carrying the scent of rain. The desert sky opened above, wide and endless. That night, the tribe gathered for a feast. The fires burned bright, drums beating a slow rhythm that echoed the pulse of the earth. Laughter filled the air, real, full, alive. Luke sat beside Taya, surrounded by people who no longer saw him as an outsider. He felt the warmth of the fire, the weight of the pendant on his wrist, and the gentle press of her hand against his. Ayana smiled at them from across the flames. The chief raised his cup high. "To the spirits," he said, "who took what was broken and gave it back whole." The people cheered, their voices rising into the night. Taya leaned close, her lips near Luke's ear. "Do you believe in fate?" she whispered. He smiled, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "No," he said softly, "but I believe in second chances." She laughed, a sound that melted into the music and the wind. As the stars brightened overhead, the two of them slipped away from the fire, walking together toward the river. The moon hung full above the water, its reflection rippling like silver silk. Taya knelt at the riverbank and touched the necklace at her throat. "This once belonged to pain," she said. "Now it belongs to us." Luke knelt beside her. "Then let it stay that way." They sat there for a long time, the sound of the river whispering between them. The world had been cruel, but somehow it had led them here, to peace, to love, to forgiveness. And when she turned toward him, her face framed by moonlight, he knew that no prayer, no penance, no lifetime of wandering could ever mean more than this one quiet moment. He reached for her, gently, reverently. Their lips met, soft and trembling, as the night wrapped around them like a promise. Above them, the desert stars burned bright and endless, witnesses to a love born from the ashes of sorrow. The necklace shimmered once, catching the moonlight, a final gleam of silver and turquoise against the dark. And the wind carried its story across the desert, the tale of a thief, a daughter, and the love that healed them both. In the end, the desert that once bore witness to blood and sorrow became a place of healing. The necklace, once a symbol of pain, now shone with the light of forgiveness and new beginnings. From vengeance was born compassion, from guilt came redemption, and from two wounded hearts blossomed a love strong enough to bridge the distance between worlds. Some stories remind us that even the wildest lands can cradle the gentlest love, if only we dare to forgive. If you were touched by this tale of love, redemption, and the unbreakable spirit of the Wild West, make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every story brings the untamed frontier to life with passion, heartbreak, and hope. Don't miss the next journey across the desert of destiny, where love always finds its way home.